Hey, Nicole.
Hello, how are you today?
I am great, and welcome to our latest edition of the Wire podcast. For those new to our podcast, what we do each and every week is talk through what's happening in the latest and greatest real estate wire fraud related scams. We are real estate title professionals by trade, real estate industry folks, I would say, collectively. And really, what we're on a mission to do is keep professionals and consumers safe through real estate transactions with this wire fraud epidemic that's happening. So, today, Nicole, what are we going to talk about?
So, today I have a lot of conversations about wire fraud with a lot of attorneys and title companies. And many of them are looking to button up their practice because even though they have certain protocols in place, they find that there are gaps and that are available for hackers to get into to infiltrate the transaction and get the funds. But there's a lot of companies out there who still feel like the protections they have in place are solid and they're preventing wire fraud, or they just feel like they're doing their due diligence. And if it happens, at least they did what they did. So I thought it would be a good idea to maybe talk about some of these processes that people are saying work for them and poke holes in the process and talk about why they may work or why they may not work, because I think it's important for professionals to think about this when running their business.
Cool.
Yeah.
Do you think that um, folks that are so I guess there's different levels of what's actually happening from a preventative standpoint for the title space. So there's folks that just are literally putting their head in the sand thinking this can't happen to them and are still really doing things in an unsafe manner, right? Like that's just a matter of time. That's not if when they get hit, it's just when, right? And so there's
Right.
that.
Yeah.
And then there's the folks that are kind of I think there are folks that are doing a really good job and then are trying to do a really good job. And then there's kind of a lot of folks in the middle that are, I think it's a case of, balancing doing new things in their processing from their processing standpoint, and also balancing like there's certain level of technological ignorance to some of this stuff, right? Like just a general not understanding of how some of this is happening and why and so there's just such a diversity in the level and degree of dealing with this problem.
Right. Right. And it's interesting. And we've always talked about it, like when we're talking about the way we prevent wire fraud, how it would protect all companies universally. But really, it's interesting because all of these companies have such different protocols in place. And this is part of the problem as to why wire fraud is still existing, is because there's no requirements that are mandated across the board. Everyone is like, oh, here's the best practice. Let's see if this works. This seems good enough. It's working for us until it doesn't. And so I think we should just dig in honestly and start knocking some of these right off
Yeah,
the
let's
list,
do it.
starting with the easiest one. So the most simple one that's a no-brainer is an email signature. Having that disclaimer at the bottom of an email signature is not going to stop wire fraud. It just makes you feel better about putting it there. Am I right?
Yeah, you're right, but also like, yeah, I mean, it really serves no, um, it serves no. There's 0.0 preventative aspect of that, other than making maybe somebody aware that. Well, first of all, who reads an email signature?
Maybe I should, but I don't.
No one reads email signatures. But secondly, there's no technical preventative thing there. There may be a little bit of awareness that it brings to someone who actually will read an email signature. And from a liability standpoint, if someone loses money because of something that you did or your business did or your clients did, that email signature is not going to waive anybody's liability in any kind of litigation. So from a legal standpoint, it's still it doesn't do anything.
It doesn't do anything. That's right. And you're right. No one reads those. And even if they did, that is not the right way to deliver that type of information to a consumer
Yeah.
about the biggest investment of their life. it's inappropriate. So yes, I think it's an addition to a process, but I don't think it should be a standalone.
Yeah. And, this all gets driven by attorneys, right? Attorneys do this crap all the time. And, if you ever have opened an email from an attorney, it's got a 3-page dissertation around their liabilities for reading these emails that, it's all attorney driven, and none of it is technical driven, meaning none of it is actually any technology in place that actually prevents anything. So no, I think 0 out of 10 as far as preventative wire fraud processes, it does almost nothing.
Okay, we're going to do a rating. I like that. Let's do that. This is good.
0.0.
0.0, I would have to agree. Could be a minus if we actually had to add that in. But
could be a minus is if you're really using that as a excuse of how you're preventing wire fraud. Like, no, you get no points for that.
That's like, yeah, exactly. You should get dinged. Let's go to the next one. So a lot of agents will say, well, my client signed a disclosure. That's not enough. They sign a lot of disclosures.
Right. Well, yeah, it's not enough to prevent anything. It may be helpful if you're in any type of litigation and your client does something they're not supposed to do. Then you can wave that document around in front of a court and say, hey, you sign this, you're SOL. But what kind of look is that to this client, this consumer that has never bought a home in their life and just wired $25,000 to a title company that they thought was legitimate? Well, yeah, you had them sign this disclosure that says they weren't going to do that, and they did it anyway because they don't know any better. So maybe it helps with removing and minimizing some of the liability for a brokerage or a title company. But what type of impression and what type of experience does that leave the consumer?
And how much do they really focus on it? Because when you're getting a consumer to sign documents with you, you don't really want to focus on the negative and scare them and possibly deter them from moving forward. So it's really a double-edged sword there on how to handle that disclosure.
What's missing to that disclosure is, here's this disclosure. Basically what it says is that wire fraud's a problem. You're not going to do this, or this. But then the back end of that's missing is saying, and here's the problem, and here is our solution. We use this product called SafeWire, and it does this, and this, and here's what to expect. This is the experience to expect. So, that's the second part of the conversation that's missing in 95% of these situations.
Right. It's like, here's a problem, but we don't know how to solve it, and we need to solve it. So, there was actually a case. Oh man, this was a few years ago, where an executive, so the guy is no dummy, he's highly intelligent, he is held highly in his field, and he forgot that he signed the disclosure. He fell victim to fraudulent wiring instructions and wired out $800,000. I mean, it's not, people think, oh, well, my client should know better. Well, it's not always about that. There are very intelligent people who are falling victim to this. And that's another thing I've heard also. I've heard agents say, well, I work with some very astute attorneys and they have everything buttoned up. So,
yeah.
Right. So no. The disclosure, I give that like a 1 out of 10.
Maybe a 2 if it helps limit your legal liability if you're sued. I think if you do something you're not supposed to do with somebody's information and they get the wrong wire instructions from an agent, then they're still getting sued. It doesn't matter whether they just sign that disclosure or not. I think one of the things we like to hide behind is we have a lot of attorneys in this space. And so we like to hide behind those, well, their attorneys are doing this or they're protecting this. The reality is they're not. I don't know. There are some of the least technical folks in any of this are attorneys, and not to bash what it is they do as a profession, but the reality is if you're looking for a preventative technology solution in addition to a people solution, typically an attorney is not going to be who you're going to go to.
Right. I agree.
Next,
All right. How about we only accept wiring instructions in person? That seems convenient for out of town closings.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
does that work?
Well, I mean, it can work if you never want to do especially during COVID, if you want to do every single closing inside of your office and you want your clients to be able to know to bring all of that information to the closing table. There, if you're doing a 10, 20, 30 closings a month in person, that could work.
That could work as long as your seller doesn't move out of state before the closing.
Yeah, as long as your seller can drive to your location and isn't afraid of getting a contagious disease in the middle of a pandemic, that all can work. Um, but if they're in another state or they've moved or they're in another country or they're in prison or they're
Right.
if they're outside of your proximity, then it certainly is a inefficient and impractical way to do it if some of those situations arise. And so generally what I think happens is they, people say, well, we only accept them in person until they don't, right? They only accept them in person until, oh, wait, that seller does live in another state. So now we have to bend our own rules. And I think that's happening more than not.
Yeah. So then the title company has to get a contract closer to go out there, do the closing. And contract closers are getting hacked as well. And check the images are being swapped out in their emails as well. And that's another way wire fraud is happening. So is it safe? Do we trust the contract closers as well? We shouldn't. We need to have one single point of truth.
That's a crazy one. You want to talk a little bit about that one? That's one that I don't think people hear a lot about, is how it's not just real estate agents and title companies who are being targeted. It's also notaries and contract closers.
Yeah, because they're on the email thread. So hackers are starting to notice, hey, this person's doing closings. Like they are a direct point of contact for me to immediately infiltrate those wiring instructions. They're emailing unsecured images of canceled checks. So, I mean, this is for when people are supposed to bring their canceled check to closing and they forget. And then it's emailed over to the title company from the contract closer because they received it from the client later. And I mean, it's wild. Like we talk about how this evolves all the time. They are simple processes that are happening and it is evolving and it is preventable. But I mean, it's not complicated. It's not like highly intelligent that we have. They're not hacking anything that's crazy. I mean, we could do this on our own. We're better than that. But this is something we could actually do. It doesn't take an IT professional.
Yeah. Can work, impractical, inefficient, probably doesn't work if you're doing any type of volume. So I'll give that one a 4.
Ooh. I would say if you get the check in person, then that's a solid 10. But as a standard business practice and to think that your business is following through with that every single time, yeah, I would say a 6 or a 7. Yeah, I'm different than you.
I'm thinking about efficiency and inefficiency. And I also think that that's a really easy one to bend the rules on which now you are back down to a 1, right? So if you have no process in place to authenticate somebody digitally and they are a seller who's now out of state, but maybe originally they were going to be in your office. Okay. Well, now they're not. So you're going to close or you're not going to close. You're going to close. So if you're going to close, then you're going to have to figure out, well, we'll just take their information through their email or take their information through the phone or whatever. Now you've just opened yourself up to an unsecured situation because that you don't have that process.
Yep.
4.
And even then, I mean, those are technically wiring instructions that are being emailed. It's just a voided check. They should be verified.
Yep.
All right, next. I'll take your 4. So I talk to a lot of companies that say, well, we send secure or encrypted wiring instructions. I'm going to give that one a real low number because once a hacker's in the recipient's email, it doesn't matter if they're encrypted or secure. They can just log right in.
So somebody's using a secured email platform, and that secure email platform is using some type of authentication to allow somebody to view the email. But what you're saying is if that recipient is compromised and they get a secured email, that email can still be authenticated if somebody is in that email account.
Right. Because an encrypted email doesn't necessarily mean that they're still confirming the identity of the recipient with like two-factor authentication. Right. Mm-hmm. So someone can still get into that email, no problem. Mm-hmm. And if the hacker's in that email, they're going to take those wiring instructions, swap it around and resend it over so that is what the recipient sees. And that's when the funds get redirected.
It's wild. Nicole, you're scaring me.
That's my job. This is what I think about. And this is why my sleep number on my sleep number bed is super low. It wakes me up at night.
Well, and here the other variable to all of this is it's all changing and evolving. And so some of the stuff we're talking about is actually coming out of the experiences of stuff we've actually have just seen. And so, some of the stuff sounds it sounds like everything we're saying is terrifying, but the reality is it's all coming out of stuff that's happening. So, we're just really trying to share. Now, is it happening in every single case? No, of course not. But how many times does it take for your house to burn down before you realize that maybe you should be preventing the likelihood of fire within your home? It's once in a lifetime type event, but so is buying real estate.
Right.
So,
right.
I'll give encrypted email. I'll give that one a 5.
All right.
You can live with that.
Yeah, I can live with that. I think that's okay. And I just think that it's really important. Part of the process that's so important that people skip over is not just sending things secure. It's confirm the identity of the person you're communicating with.
Yeah. Yeah. You still need to know who actually was on the other end of that. And here's the other thing is, all right, let's say it all works out, but let's say let's say it is compromised and something happens. Secured email still doesn't have any type of warranty or guarantee product behind it either.
Right.
So, you're SOL if something does go down.
And in a parallel field, this is also why wire fraud is happening, because, when banks are initiating wires, when title company says, hey, I need to initiate a wire with this bank, the bank just follows the instructions. They're not verifying who the recipient is either. You can do things and make it secure all you want, but unless you're verifying who your recipient is, then that's part of the problem. That's a huge part of the problem.
That is the problem.
It is the problem.
That is the problem. And that's the problem with banks. Like if you're, if I want to go and wire money out of my account, I can go on my phone and use my phone app, my bank app to do that. It's simple. What's not simple and what's the problem is how do I know that it actually ended up in the right place?
Right.
That's the problem.
Yes, I agree. The next one is I've talked to a lot of owners who say, oh, well, my closers call to verify. And I've asked them, I say, do they do it every time? Not every time.
Right.
We think so. We hope so.
Yeah, it's inefficient, and that's a bandwidth problem, and it cuts corners because it's one of the first things that will go if somebody's busy.
Exactly.
And we've seen plenty of phone spoofing, where a phone number gets compromised along the way, and it may only be changed by 1 digit. Oftentimes, the phone numbers that we see spoofed are only changed by 1 digit. And so when that happens, then that phone communication can be spoofed. And now you're calling to confirm, but you're calling to someone who's pretending to be the person you're supposed to be talking to.
Right. Well, and the other part of this that we're not talking about is when you call to verify wiring instructions, if it's wrong, where do you have that documented that you called to verify wiring instructions? Where are you reducing your liability and documenting it in that type of situation? Mm-hmm. In SafeWire, I'm not trying to push SafeWire, but I mean, I will, but in SafeWire, when you're entering in the information and those invites go out to the consumer, it's very clear that you're documenting your due diligence by using that platform and making sure everything's okay, and that you're doing your best to reduce your risk.
There's a log, right? There's a digital log of what's happened.
Right. You have proof. And that's so important.
100%.
So calling to verify, I think calling to verify is great. I think it's important, but I don't think it's ranked up very high.
Well, I think it's inefficient and it's easy to not do, but then there is a threat that it can be compromised. So, it's not a secure, it's one that people look to and say, well, call to verify. Well, yeah, that's great, as long as you know that the information hasn't been compromised or that somebody's actually going to do it. So I think to me, that one is way overhyped as a solution when it's really a half-assed solution at best.
Right. And so when we talk about calling to verify, here's probably one of the number one reasons why closers don't call to verify. First of all, they're busy and these calls take 10 to 15 minutes each on average. And that's not a number we made up. That's a number we're getting back from the industry as a whole. Also, closers would be salespeople if they really like to pick up the phone and talk to people. So they're less inclined to do that. Yeah. It really reduces their quality of their work life.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, it's totally true. Right? I don't know many people who work inside the title office that love to be on the phone talking to people. There are a few. Like there are shops where the closer does everything from beginning to end, meeting with the agents and whatever. They are very social by nature, but the majority of them are not. They would communicate via email all day long if that was their choice.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a 4.5 at best.
Mm-hmm. I think that's high.
It's definitely, I think, the number one misconstrued way people think they're staying safe.
Right. And when we say that a company is going to call to verify, there are assumptions being made, and we know about the word assume and what it really means. So let's move past that and go to the next one. Notarized wiring instructions. How expensive and inconvenient for a consumer to have to go get their wiring instructions notarized. If someone told me that, I would be beyond irritated.
Is it? So I guess it's inefficient. It's inconvenient. There's a cost to it. I guess for the title company, though, that requirement is a way for them to pass the buck if something were to happen. At least they have something they're putting in place that says, we have this at this point in time, we know that this is a real person who showed up and actually had these things notarized. And if fraud were to happen, we can go back on this one person.
Right. I think it's a secure way to make it happen. Do all consumers follow through with it? We don't know the answer to that. Does the consumer have to figure out where to go to get that done and pay for it and take more time out of their day to do this? Yes, they do. But I mean, it is a good way to make sure it is secure. It's just extremely inconvenient.
Let me ask this. So, all right, I'm a seller. I have wire instructions. I go to my bank. They print them out. Somebody at the bank notarized that. Am I physically taking it to the title company and hand delivering it? Which that's safe, but I would imagine a lot of times, what are they doing? They're emailing it.
Yeah, I have no idea.
I would have to suspect that a lot of them are just emailing it, right? Maybe I'm wrong, right? If you're going to create that much inefficiency and inconvenience for the consumer, maybe they're making them show back up at the title company in person and hand it.
I would think they have to do it in person. But again, this goes back to the case where, you have relocation happening too. Are people able to do this physically? I've talked to people who are sellers who say they're 3 states away and they can't get back to their local bank to initiate a wire. There's a lot of this that happens on a regular basis. So,
yeah, I guess if you're going to your bank if you're a seller and you're going to your bank and they give you printed out wire instructions, they notarize them, you hand delivering them to the title company. The title company physically can see that this is you. Yeah, like that to me is totally legit. But it's also totally inefficient, and it's totally inconvenience to the customer.
And the customer then relays that back to their agent, and then the agent is thinking about who they're using for title. While they appreciate the title companies covering the part and protecting their client from wire fraud, they may hear disgruntled clientele getting back to them. The point of this process is really, with real estate, I mean, the primary goal is to make it as seamless and secure as possible. And so while that makes it secure, I would give it a 10 out of 10 on the secure side if that's what's happening every time. But on the seamless side, I would give it about a 2.
Yeah, it's incredibly inefficient.
Right.
Yeah.
The next one and the last one, I talked to plenty of companies who say that they do checks or with certified checks these days, and that's the only way they will close with their clients. Because there's no check fraud, right? Why don't you dig into that a little bit, Chris?
Well, there's every type of fraud you can imagine, but yes, there's absolutely is check fraud. And it's one of the reasons states like Ohio have changed their laws to prevent things like check fraud. So, we have a thing in Ohio, and other states have this as well, called a good funds law. And so a good funds law basically means that if someone needs to bring monies to the title company, if it's more than $10,000, they have to do it through a digital payment, like a wire. They can't do it through a check. And the reason is because checks can be returned, checks can be forfeit or counterfeited. So that we see counterfeit checks all the time. Generally, what happens is someone has gotten a check from a title company at some point in time, and on those checks it has account numbers and it has routing numbers, and so they can then go and take those account numbers, routing numbers, the name of the business, and they make their own checks. And they'll go and try to get those checks cashed somewhere or deposited somewhere. And so because of check fraud situations like that, we have different laws in place now. We also have different processes in place now. So banks have processes when it comes to clearing checks where we do something what's called a reverse positive pay, meaning that if the title company cuts a check to Nicole, and let's say that check is for, I don't know, $5,000, and you close on your home and you get your check, and we have to say to you, Nicole, you need to wait 1 hour, need to wait at least an hour for this check before you go to cash it at your bank or clear it at your bank. And you don't do that, you rush over to the bank and don't listen to our instruction, the bank is going to tell you, you can't cash this check because you didn't wait, you didn't allow it to go through the reverse positive pay process. And so what the reverse positive pay process basically does is every hour on the hour, we send a digital file to the bank that tells the bank which checks to clear and release. And so if it doesn't sync up, then they're not going to clear and release that check. So there's all kinds of security things in place now because of check fraud specifically. So check fraud does happen quite a bit.
Yeah. When it comes to check fraud, I think it's also important to note that I remember hearing about this before with realtor checks, even their commission checks. Realtors have emailed their commission checks to their brokers so they can get paid quicker. And those checks have also been taken and repurposed, and they've taken the account numbers and routing numbers and written checks against that account as well, which is another reason we have to put so much security in place for checks. It's crazy.
Yeah, to surmise some of this, at the end of the day, and we talk about this a lot, is that this is not just a technology problem. This is not just a people problem. This is a people and a technology problem and a people and technology solution. So we do need both. We do need we need humans and human intelligence to be leveraging technology to keep these transactions safer, efficient, and a better experience ultimately for the consumer. We don't really have a choice. Like, these solutions are already appearing and they're coming. And this is, as a traditional real estate industry, we are competing against newer, faster digital solutions. So we have to adopt ways to leverage technology to create secured, efficient solutions for consumers. We have to adopt and adapt to those, and we have to do it sooner than later. Otherwise, a lot of folks will be looking for other careers in the next 5 to 10 years.
It's crazy that there's even this many variables in how people are accepting wiring instructions. It's crazy.
Totally. And I think one of the reasons is that the industry was caught flat-footed when this stuff's really started happening 5 years ago. There's really been no consensus in and around what to do and how to do it. And so, after the recession and after the CFPB came into being, there was this thing called TRID, and there were these new kind of guidelines that came out that said you, as a title company, needed to do these 10 things, right? Well, and a lot of people spent a lot of time putting these things in place and doing these new things and all of this stuff, and none of it protected against wire fraud. So we did all of these, we had all these consultants who made all this money charging title companies to come out with all of these different protocols to, support the financial industry. And guess what? We still had this epidemic of wire fraud happen because we didn't put policies and procedures in place that actually prevent any of this. Right. And so now we're all kind of left standing around going, well, what do we do? Right. And unfortunately, it's getting worse, not better.
Yep.
So what we want you to do is contact Nicole at SafeWire.com and say, hey, we need your help, because we believe that there are some things we could be doing more securely, more efficiently, and we just want to get a general assessment of what could be done differently. And that's what we do, is we help keep your business and your consumer safe through our expertise and our product, SafeWire.
Absolutely.
Anything else, Nicole?
Oh, there's always something else, but we'll just cut it off.
We'll hold it for next week of the Wire podcast. So, Nicole, I appreciate you putting this together today, kind of recapping some of the things that exist that we should be doing, shouldn't be doing, and generally speaking, to kind of leave this and wrap this in a bow. At the end of the day, the folks that are doing this are sophisticated. They're becoming more and more advanced. And as this problem shifts and evolves, we need to shift and evolve with it. So this is a technology and people solution. So working with companies like SafeWire is how we keep our businesses and our clients safe.
Awesome.
That's all we got. Thanks for listening, and check us out next time on The Wire.
Talk to you soon.
Later.